Have the link for the handout. Here is the handout link for those who would like it. Of course, I will display it on screen.
Hi, John.
Happy birthday, Charlene.
It's close, but not there.
I won't see you on your birthday.
Yeah, my birthday is on not the best day.
Yes.
So the headlines of the newspaper are not the best. They don't announce me, they announce the atomic bomb.
75 years.
Thank you.
It does make it hard to ignore. As usual, we'll give it a couple minutes for letting people to sort out their technology on their end. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
Happy to be here.
Doing well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Few people on YouTube. Hello to all of you folks.
I have a quick question, please.
Of course.
Where is the link to the handout?
It's in the chat through Zoom.
Okay, the Zoom chat.
I will send it again so it makes the chat window pop up. There should be a little flashing icon that says chat.
Oh, I see it. I actually see it now. There are two handouts?
No, just one. I just repeated the link just to make sure that everyone could see it.
Okay.
But I will be also displaying the handout on screen when we get to it.
Okay, thank you.
But I know a lot of people like to have their own copy, and some people read on different device from the device that they're using for watching. So it's just a courtesy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that we are about at our normal cushion time for technological snafus and people's late logins and reminders about the class. Oh, reminders about the class. You know what? Excuse me. That is my fault. Where'd my mouse go? Now my mouse has disappeared. There we go. I realized that I forgot to send out a reminder on the other program. Let me just grab. There we go. Now that official reminder has been sent out. Let's get back to the text. All right.
Yes.
All right, so let's get down to work now that I've
I do, but I put myself on mute.
Now that I've reminded myself to remind other people. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining during a little study time at lunchtime. I think there's a little bit of crosstalk, so just a reminder to being good shepherd of your muting and unmuting as needed. we're going to continue our march through the book of Deuteronomy, which, of course, ironically, is not marching at all. Deuteronomy takes place pretty much all in one place, more or less, as we prepare for the crossing over the Jordan River. And in this week's parasha of Eikev, Moses is talking to the people, giving them further exhortations to do right. You may remember last week we looked in depth at the warnings and prohibitions regarding idolatry. This week we're going to look at a set of blessings that will come as more of encouragement, some warnings as well, but I want to focus on the blessing side. And with that as our introduction, we're going to get underway. As you can see, we are in Deuteronomy 7, Devarim 7, and we will begin at verse 12, which is where the Torah portion begins this week. Everyone see it? Excellent. Once again, thank you to the great people of Sefaria.org for having a wonderful website. Please make sure you check it out on your own time. And if you do obey these rules and observe them carefully, the Lord your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that he made on oath with your fathers. So, very quick little outline of the Brit. Brit is the Hebrew word for covenant, right? God made a covenant with our ancestors, avotecha, right? Your ancestors. This would be the different conversations that God had specifically with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that there would be a everlasting covenant, a relationship between God and their offspring. And that is going to be, as we'll see here, semi-conditional on whether or not we are engaged in the mitzvot, whether or not we are following the rules, the mishpatim, as they are referred to in this particular verse. So if we do, that is to say, if we uphold our end of the bargain, then what will God do for his end in response to fulfilling his side of that oath? He will favor you. Excuse me, let me make sure I got the Hebrew in line here. Right? He will favor you and bless you and multiply you. He will bless the issue of your womb and the produce of your soil, your new grain and wine and oil, the calving of your herd, the lambing of your flock, in the land that he swore to your ancestors, to your fathers, to assign to you. A reminder that the Hebrew word for fathers is also the Hebrew word for ancestors. So it's there is no right or wrong definition of how to translate avotecha. It could be both the gender-inclusive ancestors or the gender-specific fathers. However, in this particular case, it's probably no specific reason to think that this promise was being made only to the male line. First, I want to draw your attention to the three words that start this verse. In the English, it reads out as, he will favor you and bless you and multiply you. In Hebrew, of course, it is much more compact, Hebrew being a wonderful language that includes both the subject with the verb, that is to say, if it's a masculine singular, you don't need to say the pronoun, and also the object of the verb, the you, is included as well. So those first three words in the Hebrew, v'ahevecha, avecha, v'herbecha, this is boom, 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 these three blessings. And you'll also notice that first one, v'ahevcha, is actually saying God will love you. This is being translated as favor because they want to do something a little bit more broadly than that. But we're going to come back to that a little bit later on, and I want to make sure you understand that the literal Hebrew word here is to love, rather than, for example, chen, or for being gracious to us. So he will love you, he will bless you, and he will multiply you, make you many. The issue of your womb, of course, the produce of your soil, these are both things about fertility, fertility of our bodies, fertility of the land. And then, of course, reminding us of the fertility that will come in many different forms, grain, wine, and oil, primary produce and primary staples in the ancient world, as well as what would happen with our animals in our land that God had given us. He goes on to say, you shall be blessed above all other people. There shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock. Sterility, of course, was a huge problem in the ancient world. There were so many environmental factors that could create sterility which would prevent not only the building of a family, which of course was of primary importance to many, many people, but also the economic downside. Remember in the ancient world that children were not just because we love them, they were also part of an economic insurance against old age when we could no longer work and fend for ourselves. So the idea that there would be a cure to sterility was a very important promise. The Lord will ward off from you all sickness. He will not bring upon you any of the dreadful diseases of Egypt, about which you know, but will inflict them upon all your enemies. Okay. A couple of things here that we need to get clear from the translation. Again, as much as I love the Jewish Publication Society translation, which is the default here at Sefaria, being one of the cleanest modern translations, oftentimes the cleanliness of its translation obscures things that our commentaries are going to pick up on. So in this particular case, this phrase kol choli, right, all of sickness, right, is a little bit ambiguous, not too much, but the v'chol madvei mitzrayim haraim is much, much more complicated. Right? All of the problems, the afflictions of Egypt that were terrible, haraim, evil, the evil problems of Egypt. That is not quite as immediately clear to understand that it is just a disease or what type of diseases. Why were Egyptian diseases singled out for protection? What exactly is going on in this part of the promise is not 100% clear just from the reading of the Hebrew. That is why, of course, we need tradition, commentary, and debate, which we will come back and look at this in much more detail. And then one final issue with the translation, Bechol son echa at the end is not actually enemies. Oivecha is the Hebrew word for your enemies. Son echa are those who hate you, the haters, to use the modern vernacular, which is perhaps a little different than your enemies, meaning the people that you are fighting against, which can often have different justifications. However, those that hate you, it's taking the issue out of our hand and putting it into the hands of those who would attack us. So there is, I think, a very important distinction between using the term your enemies and those who hate you. All right, any questions up to verse 15 before we continue on what happens in the next stage? Checking YouTube chat, and Zoom chat. All right, shall we move on to verse 16 then? Let's just scroll down. You shall destroy all the peoples that your Lord your God delivers to you, showing them no pity. And you shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Again, we can see from last week's discussion how it moves into this week as well, that the issue here is not just that we are destroying and attacking those who have taken our homeland and are warring against us, but they also need to be removed completely from the land, not because of them in themselves, but because of their idolatrous practices, the immorality of their cultures, which would entrap us. And if you think that seems a little harsh, well, we actually have a good historical record that this is indeed exactly what happened, that there was not a full settling of Israel as being a completely monotheistic zone where morality was not completely embraced. And indeed, the practices of the others who were in that land did become a problem. I should point out, for those of you who aren't familiar with the ancient world so much, that it used to be very much that if a person moved to a new land, what they would do would be follow the behavior of the inhabitants. The famous phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans, was not new during the Roman Empire. So if you were moving from one part of the ancient Near East to another part, you would adopt the gods and the practices of the new place you went. You wouldn't necessarily hold on to the gods of your previous culture. This then telling us that we should not be following the practices of the people whom we find in the land when we arrive is quite a break from the cultural norms of the day. Should you say to yourself, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we dispossess them? as the Jewish people at this time were, as Deuteronomy itself tells us, a tiny people, you need have no fear of them. You have but to bear in mind what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and all the Egyptians. The wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God liberated you, thus will the Lord your God do to all the peoples you now fear. Okay. So this whole introduction section from 12 through 19 seems to be giving us a fairly clear layout of what our history is supposed to be from this point going forward, from this point before the settlement of the land of Israel. We need to follow the commandments. We need to make sure that we are not being entrapped by the practices of the inhabitants or surrounding cultures. And then we need have no fear. They will fall before us. We will be strong against them. Our own bodies will be healthy and able to withstand and not succumb to any disease. Everything will be good. But this, of course, creates a theological secondary question. If we do what God asks, then everything will be good. Therefore, if everything isn't good, does that mean we weren't doing what God asked? Which would be another way of saying, if we are suffering, does that mean we are being punished? If God says, to speak specifically to the case at hand, if God says that we will be spared,
up the garage.
if God says specifically that we will be spared diseases, does that mean if we are having diseases, that this is some form of divine punishment, either specifically sent or not being prevented from being within our communities? And this is, of course, something that affects Jewish communities across the world at this time, Israel, as well as Jewish communities in any other country. So this leaves you scratching your chin, or at least if you are like me, and then saying, well, how do we then interpret this? Is God promising us health the way it seems to be promising? And does that mean the lack of health is a sign of the lack of God's favor? We're going to work through some of our commentary, which will deal with this issue, and see how our sages in past centuries have handled it, who, of course, faced much worse diseases and health problems than we ever did, not to mention military and other types of societal ills that were much more severe in the past. As an aside, anybody who ever tells you things were better in the old days has never studied the old days. By every measure and metric, whether it be physical health, whether it be mental health, whether it be freedom from violence, we are all much better off now. Let me make a caveat. Almost all of us are much better off now than they were in the past. Statistically, demographically, each of us has a much better chance to live a full, happy, and trouble-free life compared to the physical ailments that our ancestors had to face. And by ancestors, I mean human ancestors anywhere in the world, pretty much at any time in history. However, that doesn't mean that we can't look for better. And that doesn't mean that we can't still wonder when we are having an outbreak like this or any other form of suffering of what is the cause, and of course, then what are the remedies. But before we get into the commentaries, I always want to give a chance for people to ask questions about the Torah text itself before we move away from this page. Going once, going twice. Remember, on YouTube, you're on a delay, but please go ahead and type your questions in the chat, and I will get back to them as soon as I see them pop up. Thrice. All right, on to our commentary. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of our relationship vis-a-vis our enemies, because after all, it's said that we will be free from these illnesses, but they will instead be put upon our enemies, and that we are then commanded to destroy the enemies. Oh, that reminds me, sorry, it's always one little thing that slips through the brains. We go back to verse 16 where it says to destroy. For those of you that are more familiar with Hebrew, you'll see that it says ve'achalta, right? You will consume, you will literally eat et ha'amim, the nations. So that is what our first commentator, Ibn Ezra, is picking up on. You will consume, right? Rather than using the generic term destroy, he's emphasizing the specific idiom that's being used in the Hebrew. We are commanded to destroy them like someone consuming bread, as evidenced by the subsequent phrase, your eye shall have no pity. Right, there is a difference, he's trying to argue, between attacking someone and removing their capacity to make war, and attacking someone and removing them completely, right? That they will be gone the same way that if you were eating a piece of bread, the bread is no longer there when you're done. Now, I should point out that in most cases, this was meant to be done by asking them to surrender. And once they were surrendered, to indeed either remove them from the territory or at the very least remove their culture so that it would not be a trap for further immoral practices. But that seems to be the sense. But this is then reminding us of this idea of how do we then treat the nations around us? Is this a law for all time? Is this the way we handle anyone who is different than us? And we'll see from the Talmud that that is not the case. Right? Rav Bevai Bar Gidel says, Rabbi Shimon Chasdai says, it is prohibited to rob a Gentile, but it is permitted to retain his lost item. Meaning that if your next door neighbor is a non-Jew, you are not allowed to go and break into his house and steal stuff. Now that may sound surprising, but it is important that this is cleared because in many ancient cultures, and indeed even in still some modern communities, taking from people who aren't like you is considered perfectly acceptable. And therefore, this needs to be spelled out. As Rav Huna says, from where is it derived that it is prohibited to rob a Gentile? As it is stated, and you shall consume all the peoples that your Lord your God shall deliver unto you. Indicating, the argument goes, that it is permitted to consume the other nation's property only when they are delivered into your hand. That is to say, in times of war. That yes, during the times of the conquest of Joshua and during the defensive wars of David, this was indeed allowed to take their property in the course of war, but not when they are not delivered into your hand. But during times of peace, during times when there is no war, then one is not allowed to engage in such activities. There is not general permission to steal from non-Jews, even though this verse seems to be saying God will deliver them into our hands. That deliverance is not carte blanche permission to take from them. That deliverance is actually a limiting factor, saying only during times of deliverance in battle are we allowed, as in the course of battle, to secure the property that was being used to wage war against us. With regards to returning lost property, it's a more complicated issue that I don't want to go into too much detail, but when someone comes across lost property and it cannot be determined that it belongs to a Jew, there is not considered the same obligation to return it because in ancient days, there was usually no way to guarantee a fair return to somebody who was not playing by the rules. That is to say, if you say, I found a lost cow and a non-Jew demands it in return, he or she may not be actually providing the proper signs to know that that cow does indeed belong to them, and returning it to them could just as easily be giving it to a thief as it could be giving it to the original owner. And certainly if we were sure of who the lost cow belonged to, then we would return it. Because as we're going to see from Rabbeinu Bachya, this permission is something that needs careful understanding. Our sages in Bava Kama, the passage we just read, state that this was true only at the time when the Canaanites were being delivered into the hands of the Israelites during the years of conquest. Nowadays, stealing from or robbing Gentiles is certainly prohibited. In fact, the Talmud there describes stealing from the Gentiles as a greater sin than stealing from Israelites, as it involves the desecration of God, the name of the Lord. The Jewish people are to be models of morality. If we steal, we drag God's Torah into disrepute. So the idea that we are not allowed to steal from them is not merely a rolling back of the permission God gave. It is, in fact, a stronger prohibition than when we are told not to steal from other Jews. Because when we steal from other Jews, the person will say, that guy is a jerk. When we steal from non-Jews, that person will say, Jews are jerks, God is terrible, their Torah is meaningless, and other such curses against us. And Indeed, we have seen this, right? When someone is harmed by a different ethnic, religious, cultural, whatever national group, they will usually generalize and then stereotype the entire population to which that person belonged. Whereas when they are harmed by someone of their own group, they will usually limit their criticism to just the person doing it. So for many thousands of years, we've had this wisdom, and yet people continue to stereotype, much to our own dismay. But come on, the passages we've been reading still really do seem like there is this issue of physical blessing that will go to the Jews. Okay, fine, we can't go around stealing from people. We can live with that, but we should at least be able to expect from the prosperity that is being talked about in chapter 7. How do we interpret this blessings of these the protection from illnesses that are mentioned there? Well, Sforno first of all wants to try and tell us what to make of these two different distinctions of all the illnesses and the maladies of Egypt. So he says for the first one, any manner of illness, including those that are the result of climatic conditions, and the evils of Egypt, he argues, these are illnesses that are contagious. So what he's trying to say is that the Torah is making two different categories of illness that we are going to be protected from. Some of those are illnesses that come from living in certain places that cause the body to weaken and succumb to different diseases or illnesses. Others, on the other hand, he says, are not limited to an individual's reaction to their environment, but instead are problems that come from other people, meaning contagious diseases. They certainly understood that there were both kinds of illnesses. And he is saying here that Egypt was being used as a metaphor for the center of contagious disease. And therefore, that was being used as a symbol for the types of diseases that God would also protect us against. However, he's not the only interpreter of this. There are others who have a slightly different view on what to make of these types of illnesses. Rabbeinu Bachya, in particular, says, the Lord will remove all manner of sickness from you. That passage refers to the kinds of maladies all of mankind is plagued by. And all the specific illnesses prevalent in Egypt are unusual kinds of diseases. So he's saying not that there are environmental and infectious illnesses. He is saying there are regular and irregular illnesses, and that we are getting protection from both. But as you can see, both of these authors so far are trying to say that the blanket protection is still there. Alternatively, he does offer a different interpretation. The words all manner of sickness may refer to sickness which attacks the body from the outside due to the climate and the conditions of foul air. Again, coming closer to what Sforno said. The words illness prevalent in Egypt would refer to diseases originating inside the body. Concerning those, Moses says, God will not afflict you with them. So it doesn't give quite a good justification for why this interpretation could be possible. But again, he is trying to divide illnesses into two categories. Those that come from outside, things that are introduced by environmental conditions, and those that are introduced from inside. And now in modern terms, we might interpret that as being something like there are certain genetic illnesses that are based off an individual's DNA, and then there are illnesses that come from the environment, from bacteria, viruses, and other things. Yes, John?
On that last one, there is a modern corollary with bacterial infections that afflict the lungs and the outer parts of the body are called gram positive and gram negative bacteria, which afflict the gut and parts of our intestines that are not exposed to the air. And they're treated with different classes of antibiotics. For example, TB is treated with a different class of antibiotics than a gut infection would be treated, because one is exposed to outer parts of the body and the other is an inner part of the body.
That's interesting. I didn't know of that distinction. Any other questions or comments so far? Now, so far, it sounds like we're all doing great, right? So far, we should be having full protection, whether it's inside and out, whether it's from climate or contagious or whatever the issues might be. It seems to be that these commentators are saying the protection really is a blanket umbrella protection that will cover all situations, which maybe heightens our issue of, well, what about the problems that we are now facing? And what are the problems that people have been facing? Because believe me, we are not the first generation to scratch our face and say, I'm not sure if everyone who gets sick deserves it. And indeed, we're now going to see a passage from Bava Metzia, which seems to drive that very powerfully home. The Lord will take away from you all sickness, from our verse. Rav says, this is the evil eye. All right, a little bit of a background. Excuse me. Someone decided it was a good time to call me, but they can go to voicemail. We need to do a little background on what they meant by the Ein Hara, the evil eye. This term has been used far too much in the I don't know if you want to the superstitiousness of civilization, and it does not mean what people think it means, at least not Jewishly and rabbinically. Traditionally, according to the Talmud, when we talk about the evil eye, we are talking about when someone is jealous of another person, when a person is looking at them with anger and resentment, that not that there are magic beams coming out of the eye, although some ancient medical people did think that that's how the eye worked, but that instead that a person would look with such intensity that they would be actively seeking to do harm to that person, whether it be praying against them, whether it be trying to curse them by some form, or whether actually hurting them through acts of poison, through acts of violence, through acts of diminishing their ability to feed themselves and other things. So the evil eye here is really person versus person conflict that he is talking about. Craig, yes.
So would it be safe to say that the evil eye is a manifestation of envy?
Absolutely, yes. Of envy, jealousy, resentment, all of those horrible emotions that make us angry when we see another person doing something that either we wish we had or we wish they didn't have. That is the potency that comes from this and what it causes us to do.
I'm wondering right now if that's what's referred to in the book of Genesis when Cain was identified as having a fallen countenance or something like that.
When it says that it fell, usually that is more a sign of grief, that he was distressed, upset by it. Upset doesn't really quite hit the level of emotion, but distressed and grief when God did not accept his sacrifice the same way. He indeed was deeply upset by that. And then what would have happened afterwards was he took steps to fix the problem by removing the competition.
Oh, thank you for that clarification, Rabbi.
Which, of course, I should remind everyone, that's not the way you fix the problem. Now, what does he say about this evil eye? Rav conforms to his line of reasoning. As Rav went to a graveyard and did what he did, meaning he investigated the causes of death for all the people in the graveyard, and he said 99 of these died by the evil eye, and only one died by entirely natural means. So what he is arguing here is that the people in the graveyard were succumbed. They died when they died because the other people had acted against them. That the major source of death was ultimately the fighting between the people in the community. Now, this then implies that under good times, when we are doing what God has said and God will protect us, that God would protect us from this evil eye. However, as much as we still have to wonder whether we're good enough to deserve that protection, notice that there was also a corollary implication, which is that the protection we are being given here is not protection from natural illnesses, right? Because natural means that still happen, 1 out of 100. So we have to then say that Rav believes that being ill from a natural cause does not mean that one is has lost God's protection. Being ill from a natural cause is ill from a natural cause. Right? The real protection we should seek from God is protection from those who wish us harm. And the harm that we get from being sick, well, that's just a natural way of the world. Shmuel is going to argue back a little bit on this. And Shmuel said, all sickness, from our verse, refers to the wind. There is an ancient belief that wind, the air around you, was the most important cause of illnesses. The Gemara, the Talmud comments, Shmuel conforms to his line of reasoning, meaning he said somewhere else, as Shmuel says, every injury suffered by people is due to the wind, meaning that enters wounds and bodily cavities. It's the wind that comes into our body that always brings with it the illnesses that we have. However, the Gemara is going to push back, but according to Shmuel, aren't there those executed by the monarchy and others killed by traumatic injury and not the wind? Meaning, you can't say everybody dies because of some airborne illness, because there are people who get their heads cut off by the king. That would seem not to be an airborne illness that took them from this world. With regard to these two, were it not for the wind, they would prepare a medicine for those injured people and they would be healed and live. So what is he saying? He's saying that there is this issue in the wind that in his day was unable to be treated and dealt with. And that caused even people who we might have been able to save with medicine to still pass away from this world. Meaning that in his day, and still unfortunately to our day, medicines are not perfectly able to counter everything that is able to infect and harm a human body. We are doing well, but it is not perfect. I would argue that what he is talking about here really would be the things that are beyond our control, that we cannot touch and grab and feel the wind, those things that are still beyond our understanding or beyond our ability to provide treatment for, those are, according to him, the things that actually cause us to die. And if we had the ability to control and deal with them, we could fix them. As much and as ridiculous as it sounds that we could reattach a head, it would have been ridiculous to say 200 years ago that we could reattach a hand. And yet science has been able to do that. Not in all cases and not easily. But we have already created miracles in the last century of scientific progress in medicine. And it is my firm belief that for every physical ailment, there is a physical cure if we bend our attention towards trying to find it. Rav Chanina is the final in this section talking about this issue of illness, and he gives a different idea as well. It, meaning the sicknesses referred to in our verse, refers to the cold. As Rav Chanina says, all is at the hands of heaven except for excess cold and heat. As it is stated, cold and heat are on the path of the perverse. He who guards his soul shall keep far from them, from Proverbs 22. The idea that he's trying to convey here is that, yes, there are many things that happen that are by heavenly decree, but there's also a lot of harm that a person does to him or herself by doing things that aren't wise. In their day, they had already recognized that excessive heat and excessive cold could lead to bodily problems. And he's arguing that if you get sick because you went out in the cold, you can't blame God for that. Right? If you engage in high-risk behavior and then you get sick, don't say that's because God, for some reason, removed his protection. It just means you did something stupid. We do not rely, as we've talked about previously in this class, we do not rely on God's miracles to protect us when we are doing something that is obviously stupid and counterproductive to our own health. Let us go ahead and continue. This is from another section of Talmud, now trying to talk more about the fertility that we mentioned. Reish Lakish says, what is the meaning of that which is written, there shall not be male or female barren among you or among your cattle? Seems straightforward to me, doesn't it? Nope. When will there not be a barren male among you? at a time that you act as among your cattle, meaning you urinate when the need arises without hesitation. The rabbis were very strong believers in the medical belief of their day that to unnecessarily restrain your bladder was a act that could create biological problems for you. I understand that that is indeed the case, that a person who for a prolonged period tries to refrain from urinating can indeed introduce themselves to all manner of infections and other bladder afflictions. And as he's trying to say here is that the juxtaposition of our fertility and the cattle's fertility is not to make it sound like these two things are equal, but to remind us that, you know, sometimes the animals know how the body works a little bit more intuitively than we do. And if we listened to our body and responded as it was indicating, we might all be a little bit healthier. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, different interpretation, it means you will not be barren of students. The term, or female barren, indicates that your prayers will not be barren, meaning unheard, before the omnipresent, before God. And when will they be heard? At a time when you place yourself in prayer as an animal, meaning with humility. If you allow yourself to recognize in all humbleness that the difference between us and the beasts is rather insignificant, especially compared to the difference between us and God, if we enter into our conversation with God with that level of humility, then we will find that our ability to pray and the way that we can recognize prayers being found in the world will be much easier for us. It is usually in our arrogance that we either choose not to pray, pray superficially, or pray and don't recognize the gifts that we are being given in response to our prayers. More on that last one in a little bit. But any questions here from Bechorot in the Talmud? All right, so one of the things I want to try and point out is that we've seen that although there is still this ambivalence of exactly how much and when there might be protection for us, that the protection is not always what we may think it be. Sometimes that protection may be from the evil eye, which is not illness at all. Sometimes that protection may be from certain attendant problems, but not the initial calamities. Sometimes that protection may be simply that we are doing what is smart. And if we do what is smart, we'll be fine. And if we do what is stupid, all bets are off, and it doesn't matter how righteous you are. If you walk into an infectious laboratory and refuse to follow the proper protocols, even if you are a righteous person, God is not going to pull you out of the germ plague that you've put yourself into. However, is there not still some issue with our connection and with our enemies? Doesn't that seem to still give us some indication of what type of illnesses these might be? Well, Or HaChaim says, in addition, God assures us that even when he inflicts our enemies with these infectious diseases, we will not catch these infections. He tries to add that indeed these illnesses are the standard infectious diseases we are familiar with. And what is being promised here is the miraculous avoidance of us from these infections. In many other places, however, rabbis argue against this idea, saying that when the sword of the plague has been unsheathed within a city, it will strike down both the righteous and the wicked all the same. So this is a minority opinion, but I felt for, what's the right word, for completeness, it's important to include. But surely, even if we're not 100% sure about this whole health issue and fertility issue, at least we know that we are going to be blessed. After all, that is the first word used in what God is about to do as the full summation. Or is it? And bless you with material wealth measurable in terms of money. This blessing improves the quality of the transient life on earth. By means of this blessing, he ensures your ability to enjoy the loving kindness of living in the land of Israel successfully, happily. So the idea here being that, yes, God does want us to have a nice time. God does want us to have a good journey in this life. And indeed, being blessed with material wealth is a good way to help make that happen. It is not sufficient in and of itself, of course, but anyone who has ever struggled with financial problems knows that lacking the resources to deal with life's basic needs, it does make life a much different experience than at least being able to meet those minimums for a stable and feeling of security. But is that really the point? Is the point really about being blessed with stuff? Is that really what our goal is and our motivation? Well, not surprising from, come on mouse, don't go too far, from Sefer HaYashar, he's going to try and remind us that although these promises are here, and although certainly we know that blessings of material or physical well-being are possible and do happen, that centering our understanding of God upon them is rather doomed to failure, if not to backfire. So he begins by asking, now what benefit comes from serving God? Right? I mean, it may sound like a chutzpahdik question. It may sound a bit presumptuous, but this is a real question that people ask, you know. Famously, Pascal's wager is all about, what am I getting for what I have to do? And we answer that the all-embracing benefit which comes from the service of the Creator, blessed is He, and His love, is that the Creator should love the man that worships Him. As it is said, Isaiah 43, since you are precious in my sight and honorable, and I have loved you. And as it is written in our verse in Deuteronomy 7, and He will love you and bless you and multiply you. Right? That's it. If you want to know what the greatest benefit that will come to you for being a good and righteous person, then once you hear that by being a good and righteous person, God will love you, you're done. That is the greatest blessing you will ever get. Everything else enumerated and mentioned is inconsequential and insignificant. Having God's love is the beginning, the middle, and the end of what benefits you receive from serving God. But we say that in the case of simpletons and fools, it does not suffice for them, that God's love for them should be the sole reward of their worship of Him. So they wait for Him to give signs and proofs that they will attain great goodness and much pleasure. Right? Let's be honest, the vast majority of people do not jump on the God bandwagon simply because they are promised love. They jump on the bandwagon that they think will be giving out the best goodies. If you say to them that there will be given to them no other thing except the love of God for them, it will not suffice for them, and they will think that His love is like the love of human beings who do not find love of a person sufficient unless there is with that love some advantage or pleasure. All right, so he's saying two very important things. The first about God, the second about human relationships. So the first is that these people think that only having God's love is a completely inadequate reason to serve God. That the only reason a person should serve God is because of the material, physical benefits that we receive in this world. And then he very pointedly compares such an attitude to the attitude that many people have towards their relationship with other people. A reminder that love in Jewish idiom does not only mean romantic love, it also means the love between parents and children, the love between siblings, the love between friends, any other form of love that is out there. And what he is saying is that there are many people who treat the love of other human beings exactly the same way as a contractual, transactional engagement. Right? I will love you if you do X, Y, and Z for me. I mean, certainly all of us can remember when we were in elementary school, the number of times someone would say, if you give me your cookie, I'll be your best friend. Or if you don't invite me to such and such party, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. Right? Friendship was a commodity that was traded for the benefits, the physical, tangible benefits that we were seeking. Most of us outgrow that, God willing. But unfortunately, he is arguing that many people still treat other people exactly the same way they treat God, meaning they are looking for the payoff. Right? Why would you be in this relationship if you are not getting more out of it than what you put into it. And don't tell me that you're getting love. Love doesn't pay the bills, right? Love doesn't make me have physical pleasure in this moment. And therefore, love does not appear on the itemized list of what I am billing you for my friendship to you. And that he is arguing is a problem among humans, and it is an even worse problem between our relationship with God. I wish to make clearer to you that there is no greater benefit than the love of the Creator for man. If God loves him, he needs no other reward. He ought not to seek and ask whether his soul will live on or not after his death. For in the love of the Creator is contained all good reward. So again, he is saying two very profound things here. One is that if we have God's love, then no other reward matters. And wondering about possible illnesses, possible catastrophes, does that mean God does love me or don't love me? That, no. You could be poor, sick, and in a shack, but if you are still a good, righteous person who is serving God and following Torah, know that you have God's love, and everything else that is afflicting you is not a sign that God doesn't love you, right? God loves you, and his love is strong, regardless of the circumstances that you are enduring. And those bad circumstances that may be very uncomfortable for us physically do not mean that God has removed God's love. And understanding that God's love is enduring and indelible, and that God's love is not reflected only in material benefit, is a very important part of having the strength to overcome any of the difficulties that we may face for a short or long period of time. Secondly, he's also arguing that those that over-obsess with what will happen to my soul when I die are also missing the point, right? The eschatology, the end of days, and what will happen to our soul when it leaves this earthly realm is a popular topic of conversation, and many people like to make much of this. But as Sefer HaYashar is saying, that's not really what we should be focused on, because focusing on that is very much like focusing on the benefits we expect to get from God in this world. That is to say, inappropriate. It may be a slightly more delayed view of what will be benefit from God, but it is still reducing our relationship to God to a transactional nature. One of the problems with Pascal's wager that I mentioned earlier is that he is focusing more or less on the payoff. And he may be focusing on the payoff in the world to come, meaning the next life, after we have left the earthly world, but that's still looking for the payoff. More restrained, but still problematic. As he goes on to say, let me just scroll this to make it a little easier for myself to read. For since he does love him, there is no doubt that he will give him a good reward for all his deeds. Right? Once you know that God loves you, and once you know what God is, then there will be a proper reward for everything. You don't have to worry anymore, right? It's like if your best friend, borrows money from you, you don't have to write it down. You know that he'll pay it back, right? Why would you need to keep a record of this? Why would you have to even wonder whether it would come back? You know that you did something good for them, and you know they'll do a good back for you. You don't need to keep a written record of this if you truly love and trust the other person, and you understand that they love and trust you. We ought not to explore just how this good reward will be given, right? We can't say precisely what form the reward will come in. However, if there is in a man a great lust or folly, all this great glory will not suffice. Meaning, if you are really, really keen on saying, if God loved me, he'd give me a Lamborghini, then there is no way for God to ever properly satiate you. Because if you get the Lamborghini, trust me, you are going to want something in addition to that. Right? So the very people who are most in need of the physical displays of love are the ones who would be least satisfied with any physical displays of love. They will seek to discover whether there will be continuing life to their soul after it is separated from the body, or whether the soul will be lost, as though the pathways of the world to come were known to them. They will try to discover in what way those who are deserving of the world to come will have the reward. What will heaven be like? Will I have my own cloud? Will I have gold? Will I have women? Whatever fantasy they have. This is impossible to know, right? As much as we know that the world to come is not a physical world, we also don't know what it will be like to experience it. We know that it will be good because we know God is good. But beyond that, more detailed descriptions are pointless and indeed counterproductive. Only if we were angels and walked among the celestial creatures would we know the way of reward of the souls and the nature of life in the world to come. But it is not for us to explore and search the method of the punishment or the reward or of what it consists. Now, he is focusing here on the world to come, but as you can tell from the earlier parts of the same paragraph, he is trying to remind us that this also applies to this world as well. That those who seek to explain or even come up with formulas of certain correlations between certain transgressions or certain fulfillments of the commands with certain punishments and rewards are absolutely misunderstanding, misstating, and often misteaching what God wants us to understand. We serve God because we love God, and God's love of us is the only reward that is appropriate and the only reward that we should ever seek, and the reward that is freely given when we enter into that relationship. What happens beyond that, none of us can determine. It may look like in Deuteronomy that there is this perfect formula of if you do X, then you will have Y and not Z, but it is much more complicated than that. It is simply a general principle that to love God will make your life better. And for God to use some examples that at the time might have been important for the people of the ancient world to hear in order to move them away from their idols, which were promising many more types of pleasures and activities, then suffice for them, it worked. But for us, and even for them, once they moved beyond that superficial level of the relationship, then we stop counting the blessings and we stop counting the harms, and we stop attributing them to some sort of formula of our transaction with God. And even more important, we make sure that we do not try to project such a formula onto others as well, so that we never say that a person who is suffering has somehow lost God's love, but instead, by showing our love to a person in need, remind them that God too is always with them. So that's our commentary and discussion for today. If you have questions, comments, please unmute yourself or type it over in the YouTube chat, and we can carry on for a few more minutes.
Rabbi?
Yes.
What seems to be missing from much of this commentary is the benefit of good relationships, of a loving relationship with God that then gets reflected in good friends, a good spouse, good family life, which certainly does seem to be reflective. And also I was going to mention just the one thing from Proverbs where Solomon prays, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me with the food that I need, or I shall be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or I shall be poor and steal and thus desecrate your holy name."
Right. In both extremes, it is very easy to go off the rails, unfortunately. But the first part of what you were saying, I heartily agree with, and I believe our tradition teaches very strongly that if we are good to the Torah and if we view God in this lens, then unsurprisingly, we improve the quality of our life and relationships around us. That doesn't mean that there's a magic shield protecting us from everything that might harm us. After all, we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all of their families suffered from all of the issues that were talked about, whether it be fertility, whether it be famine, and whether it be illness. So we know that God wasn't giving them a blanket promise from all trouble and strife, only a blanket promise of continuing love, which would, on the whole and on average, lead to a better life then were we to have failed to use the Torah to guide our life with wisdom. I don't see anyone typing on YouTube, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. Wow, right at 1 o'clock. That's unusual. And look forward to seeing everyone. Reminder that we have Mishnah tonight for those who want to do a little Jewish law, 7 o'clock, and the Pathway to Judaism class tomorrow, helping people get their introduction to Jewish practice, thought, liturgy, history, all sorts of different topics. That's at 6 o'clock tomorrow. If you don't have links for those, check out our website or email me after the class. Take care, everyone, and be safe and take care of each other.
Thank you, Rabbi.